Hi, everybody. I'm really glad you were able to join us today. And we have a really interesting hour to spend together in your comments as we go. My name's Susan Haleman. I'm the Director of Knowledge Transfer and Utilization at Campaign Consultation. We have two speakers to chat with you today. One is Ann Beltran. Ann is a consultant and facilitator for nonprofit strategies. Ann's formerly from the Council of Nonprofits, National Council of Nonprofits, and has done a lot of research on the policy that comes with the stimulus and recovery money related to HHS. And Michelle McNeil. Michelle is an assistant editor in federal policy, recorder for Education Week magazine, or newspaper, which covers K-12 education issues. And welcome to both of you and to all of our participants today. Our agenda, as usual, will be, that's okay. We'll do some brief introductions and we'll post your questions that you've given us so far. We'll have brief presentations from both of the presenters, and then there will be an opportunity for discussion and more questions, and there'll be an evaluation at the end. Please remember that we need to report on what we do for you as part of our national work for the Corporation for National and Community Service. So please stay around to do our evaluation so we have some feedback that we can use to make these presentations better. Our objectives today are to help you to be able to use the federal and state websites and track our funding and identify current grant opportunities, as well as to strategize how your organizations might play a role in implementing these the plans that are part of the ARA money. So we look forward to delving into that, and it's a complicated issue. The questions that have come to us so far, many of them have been kind of general, and I want to get those on the table first, because certainly we can't go into detail on any of this until everybody's sort of on the same page. The money that's available through this depends on what state you're in, and it will depend on what area of activity you're interested in. And we'll show you how you can find that specifically. The websites that are available to you will go into some detail about, because there is really some good information out now, and we think you will be able to use it to track money that's coming to your area. We're going to look at how different programs in different areas of the national service arena may be able to get in on some of this money. And we're going to look at what are some of the limits, some of the pluses you have in your favor as you strategize how to move ahead with it. So we'll get into answers to these questions as we go. So in order to get us started, what is the American Recovery Act done? And one of the things that you want to certainly have done is go to the recovery.gov website. In addition to those, there are state recovery websites, there are government agency recovery websites, and there's grants.gov, which tells you about current grant opportunities. And that, if it seems overwhelming, we understand that. It can be overwhelming. The money's come down in a variety of ways, a variety of mechanisms, and certainly those sites are changing rapidly. So what you weren't able to find a month ago, you may be able to find now, and it really requires going back over these sites, going back to them time and time again. Starting with the recovery.gov website, if you haven't looked at it recently, you really need to, because they have updated their map, and you can now go to the state that you're in. You can look at spending in a variety of ways. You can look at it specifically by state and drill down to your state, what's been given out in your state, agency by agency. You can look at what money was given to the state as well as what money has been released from the state to the communities. So it really does give you some sense of where specifically the money is going. Beyond that, if you go to the state sites, this is an example, one state site, and I think most of them have this information. They've divided their money by topical area, and that relates to the agencies that have given money to the states to be distributed. And each agency is then reporting on the money they've received as well. So this is just to give you a sense that everybody down the line is having to report, is having to be very specific about where their money is going, and supposedly will be able to track it down to individual grantees. Now, we know when many of you probably have looked at those sites already, and you know that the money has been dispersed, and some of it was dispersed pretty quickly. And when you look at the progress that the different states are reporting on, the federal government's reporting on, you can see that money was given to agencies, and the agencies needed to get it out to the states quickly. They actually had two mandates. One was to get it out fast, and the other was to get it out to groups that would use it effectively and be able to report that they had results. So money really hasn't gone to new grantees in many cases. It's gone to folks that the states felt were already doing a good job and could expand what they were doing, and they could have verifiable results quickly. So that was one of the things that we noted as we saw the agencies that had, for instance, dates for grants due the end of March, beginning of April. Really we're looking at grantees who were ready to go right away, shovel ready in the services industry, you might say. So there wasn't a real opportunity for someone who had to start from scratch to apply, and that was sort of deliberate at that time, I think. But moving on from there, that doesn't mean it's over. If you go back to that recovery.gov site and you look at it either by recipient or by site, you can see who got the money in your area. And that can help you determine for the people that will be looking for partners or looking for sub-grantees over the coming months, because the fact that a group got the money doesn't necessarily mean they're ready to use it fully. And there may be opportunities to work with them, and that's what you may be looking for down the road. So you need to be keeping your eyes open as to who the players are in your area. So who or how to pursue the money that's left? That's the next question. And we thought that this was a pretty good example, and this is from the Louisiana State website again. And it shows the money coming from the federal treasury going to federal agencies, just as I just described, then going out to the state. And of course, it wasn't just to the state of Louisiana. This is just one example. And then going out to Louisiana state agencies, many times in formula grants or grants that had a limited application pool. And then from the state agencies going out to non-state entities. And as they're describing on their website, there will be opportunities coming up for non-state entities or local groups to look for the money that the states still have to distribute. And this, once again, is just another way of looking by agency, depending on your activity area. One of our questions was, if we're a senior core group, for instance, how can we get in on this money? Well, it depends what you're doing. Are you working with schools? Are you working with health care? Are you working with the generation of employment opportunities for low-income people. Depending on what your specialty area is, you need to look at the agencies that may have some jurisdiction over that, and then what opportunities are available because of that. So that's basically as much as I want to do just to get the basics out there. And I want to very quickly move to our panelists who are with us today, because they have a lot to say about two of the agencies that really have a lot of overlap with the work of our Corporation for National and Community Service Programs. Ann Beltran, as I said before, was previously a public policy analyst for the National Council of Nonprofits. She's worked in business and government as an attorney in the nonprofit sector as an analyst, director of leadership, education, training programs. Many of you may have met Ann. She did a presentation at the National Conference on volunteer generation that was excellent. And she has a real place in her heart for the place where innovative approaches come together for nonprofits and volunteer sectors. She also teaches at George Washington University. And Ann, welcome. I'm so glad you could be with us. Now, take us into the world of HHS. How are they handling recovery money?
Well, thank you for that introduction, Susan. They are handling a bushel load of money is the only way to think about it. They have so many stimulus-funded programs. When you go to their HHS recovery site, they have many, many direct service programs being funded with stimulus dollars, and their recovery site is excellent under the program icon for listing those. And they include community health centers, child care and development funds, senior nutrition programs, adoption assistance and foreign foster care programs, some money around TANF, the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, a contingency fund there. And also they have the Community Services Block Grants, which received additional funding under stimulus, and I think those go out in formula grants, and some extra funding around early Head Start and Head Start expansion. What I want to talk about today, though, is a particular kind of generic fund that we were tracking at the National Council of Nonprofits that's focused very much on the nonprofit capacity building funds. And Stephanie, if you could just back up to the previous slide, I'll spend some time on that one. This nonprofit capacity building area is one that cuts across many subsectors of nonprofits, and it's all about growing and strengthening infrastructure and capacity to support more effective, efficient, or expanded program delivery. And when the stimulus package was passed, there was this mysterious moment in the conference committee where what had been potential funds for the Compassion Capital Fund somehow morphed into this very vague $50 million that was about nonprofit capacity building, and that wound up being housed in HHS. So it took several months for this to emerge in terms of what was this $50 million going to be, and it's come out as this Strengthening Communities Fund. And if you look down the screenshot to the bottom of the first paragraph, you see that it really consists of two programs that will be using this $50 million fund. The Nonprofit Capacity Building Program, and that goes directly to lead nonprofit organizations, and a second one, state, local, and tribal government capacity building program that for the most part goes to those governmental units for outreach and education of small grassroots organizations. So the grant application process for these two programs closed July 7th, and we will not know the grantees until September. So if you most likely are working for a community-based or grassroots organization, you're wondering, well, what happens now with this huge chunk of money? So why it's important to you, if we go to the next slide, is that because even with you notice the $50 million went to $46 million, well, there's a little administrative piece there for HHS. But even at $46 million, we have that much coming into distressed communities. That is how HHS decided it needed to target these funds to be in to fulfill the purpose of the stimulus package. And this money will be going out over a 2-year period, and the organizations that applied have to provide a 20% match. So there's even potential for greater impact than the $46 million. And that money will go to, as I said, in the first program, the larger one that has $34 million, that's the nonprofit capacity building program. That money, after it hits the lead organizations, they have to provide at least 55% of that money in financial assistance to grassroots organizations in these distressed areas. So depending on who receives the grants, if that is a lead organization in your area or one of these governmental units, you potentially could be a recipient of financial assistance or training and technical assistance from these increased capacity building resources. And what's important to note going forward is that while there may not be new money in the 2010 budget for this, this does appear from the initial presidential budget request to be the heir to the Compassion Capital Fund. So over the next 2 years, I suspect HHS will be crafting this program on the evaluations that they receive. And so we all need to be watching it and ensuring that the funds are well used and that their impact is well documented. So now I really want to take it a level down to the goal and objectives and how the funds will be distributed. The overarching goal of the fund is to expand service delivery through strengthening local grassroots nonprofits in distressed communities. And a distressed community is a neighborhood or geographic community with an unemployment rate or poverty rate greater than the state or national rate. And in expanding service delivery in these communities, the objectives are to help low and moderate income people secure and retain employment. So the number one objective is jobs, anything to do with jobs. And number two, increase community access to public benefits. So these are some of the financial and tax benefits available to families and individuals under the stimulus package. So those are the two objectives of building grassroots capacity, so that it gets out to the communities to help people get jobs and access their public benefits. There is no funding of direct social services with this money. Again, you would go back to the main HHS recovery page to look at those, and of course to other government agencies, as Susan mentioned. So with this goal in mind, how will these funds trickle down? Well, again, there are these two programs. The Nonprofit Capacity Building Program is the larger one, where there will be approximately 34 grants of $1 million each. And these will go to lead nonprofit organizations who, as I noted, have already applied and their applications are being reviewed. Then at least 55% of that money must be channeled into financial assistance through a competitive process to project partners. And that would be small organizations in these distressed communities. And the idea is to equip these nonprofit project partners so that you can better achieve the objectives around helping low and moderate income individuals secure and retain jobs and access public benefits. So, for example, nonprofits who, small grassroots organizations who receive competitive financial assistance under this program as sort of a sub-grantee, you could use these funds to purchase computers, to provide free online information on state and federal benefits for people. You could perform a local workforce assessment or do other kinds of research to connect workers to employers. You could develop a resource directory or even one of these one-stop centers where people could come in and obtain free tax and benefits information, apply for benefits, file tax returns, or it could be a job readiness center. There could be a program aimed at job retention where there was academic remediation going on, ESL classes, even training in job skills for green jobs. So, how to do energy weatherization, for example. It could also support the program of the Grassroots organization supporting these two objectives could also be doing things like emergency cash or food assistance, counseling, transportation, child care, so kind of the array of help that people need when they're out applying for jobs or in training and so on. So, again, just remember that while the objectives are to reach the social impact in the community in jobs and flow through of public benefits, what the sub-grantee actually receives, besides financial assistance for some of these programs, is capacity building, like organizational development, program development, ways to better pull the community in and engage them and collaborate. It even includes leadership development. And importantly, it includes evaluation of effectiveness, because we'll have to prove that these funds are being spent to really achieve impact. So I asked myself, well, what's the likelihood if I'm listening on this call of one of these grants coming to my area? And so I wanted to highlight some of the things that were preferences and priorities in the grant application process so that, maybe you'd see yourself fitting into one of these program priorities. There's definitely a Vista edge to this program. HHS encouraged applicants for these grants to incorporate Vista volunteers in their program. And there were actually going to be bonus points awarded in this review process if the applicant was already a Vista sponsor. So that seems like a plus. The greater the applicant's focus on serving low-income populations in distressed areas as opposed to both low and moderate, and the more they would sub-grant financial assistance, like 60% instead of 55%, the better their chances of winning a grant award. And if a grant applicant proposed to reach out and work with grassroots organizations that have never received federal funds before, that was a plus in terms of trying to get an award. There was also going to be priority for financial assistance that would be given to organizations who work with agencies that administer TANF and who work with small nonprofits whose budgets do not exceed $500,000. And the important thing for a small nonprofit to know is that there's no requirement for a match in your part of the application for financial assistance. And there's no requirement that you have actually achieved 501c3 status from the Internal Revenue Service with a determination letter in hand. There are other methods provided for documenting the fact that you're a nonprofit, so that seems helpful. So this is all the nonprofit capacity building program, $34 million going out in these 2-year grants, and then with all this sub-granting activity. The other smaller program is $12 million going to the governmental units for capacity building that's both within those units and focused on the clients they can reach. And there's going to be 48 grants in the range of $250,000 coming out of that $12 million fund. So it kind of sounds like, well, there'll be one in each state, maybe. And It could go to the state or to a local governmental unit, or it could even go to a nonprofit designee if neither the state nor a local unit were able to fulfill the work plan. That money, that $12 million, is going to go for those agencies to reach out to grassroots organizations to increase their involvement in economic recovery. So, maybe you have a facility and you're providing senior nutrition. Well, you might also be able to help them with their tax returns. So it's that kind of outreach and education, trying to bring more of the community organizations into helping with economic recovery. There will also be a training and technical assistance component to help nonprofits address these economic recovery issues. And at the same time, the idea is to strengthen the governmental unit as a key node that can involve nonprofits in economic recovery. So I'll just throw out a possible example of how this might all shake out, which is that, maybe you've got a local government grantee in a major city in your state, and they wind up building their capacity by hiring someone to train nonprofits in all the public benefits available for individuals and families under the stimulus package. And so then they would be reaching out, spending money to reach out and communicate with a lot of grassroots organizations in distressed communities and giving them, what you might see some train-the-trainer kinds of things going on to help those organizations who actually touch people's lives with this information about, how to get public benefits. So those are the way those two programs are going to roll out. And the opportunities for grassroots community organizations are, first of all, to get lucky that one of these grants is going to wind up in your neighborhood. And so we won't know that until September. And it's something we all need to be attentive to what Susan was saying about, keep checking back at the sites. And so in this case, particularly the HHS Strengthening Communities website, to see who got this money and are you in their geographic territory. Because if one lands in your area, then your organization will really need to move into action quickly to see, well, what kind of financial assistance or sub-grant might we get if it's a nonprofit capacity building grant, or if there's a governmental unit grant, what kind of training and technical assistance are they going to be providing us so that we can benefit our clients. So that's really an overview of just that one program lodged in HHS, but it does tend to cut across the sectors and could be helpful to a wide variety of nonprofits.
Thanks, Ann. That was great. Are there questions? Please unmute your phone if you'd like to ask a question. Sometimes it takes people a couple minutes to put their questions together, and I'll give you that chance. Maybe we'll let Michelle make her presentation, and then we'll see what questions are there for both presenters. Michelle is an assistant editor and federal policy reporter, as I said, at Education Week, and she covers the U.S. Department of Education, federal education policy, school finance issues, and she's also the creator of a blog on Politics K-12 that tracks the intersection of education policy and politics. And I came across Michelle's name because I was searching for someone to talk about Department of Education, and let me tell you, this was a search. And as a part of that search, I was motivated by a question that we'd gotten early when we first announced this session from Vista, and I think she might be on the line with us today. And she was very frustrated in trying to figure out what was happening to education funds in her area. And Michelle had just written an article for Education Week, a very good article, and I've got a link here to it, which we will post with the transcript on both the Resource Center and the Vista Campus after the session. But it was an excellent summary of where we were at that time, and I prevailed upon Michelle to update us on what's happened since the end of, I guess it was that May when you wrote that. And in 2 months, Michelle, what's going on with Department of Education?
Well, it's an excellent question. I'm constantly asking myself that same question every day. Thanks so much for that introduction. So if we, this quote you have up here about somebody searching to no avail for information is, I think it's a common thread. I think a lot of the websites out there are getting a lot better in getting information out, but I think it's a never-ending struggle to figure out how this money is flowing out and where people can take advantage of it. So it's a frustration I think a lot of people share. So if we look at education as a piece of the stimulus package, you'll see that about $100 billion of the entire stimulus package, which is a pretty big chunk, is flowing through or has some connection with the Department of Education. So this is like HHS, this is an agency to focus on because they have such a tremendous amount of money that they're dealing with. Now, unfortunately, for those out there wanting to see how to access some of this money, a lot of it is kind of already spoken for. It is, as Susan, I think, was talking about earlier, she noticed that a lot of money has gone to existing grantees. It's kind of the same thing that's happening in education. A lot of this money is flowing through existing formulas, through formulas that have been around for years that send money from the federal government down to school districts, whether it be for special education or for Title I, which is for disadvantaged students. And a lot of this money is being used to backfill cuts that states are making to education. So the money is being eaten up before it's even hit the states, just by staffing teachers so that we don't have to lay people off, et cetera. So a lot of the money is pretty much already spoken for. In addition, there isn't a lot of money to track right now. I looked at the most recent spending reports from the Department of Education, and only about half of the stimulus money has even been obligated to states. A lot of the money is flowing through states and down to districts or down to sub-grantees. And of the only half that's been obligated, only about 20% of that has actually been drawn down by states. So when I look at my most recent report, I think only 12 billion of that $100 billion has actually been drawn down by states. So there's not a lot of money out there to track, not a lot of money out there yet to access. However, I think there are some indirect benefits to this money that's flowing out through these existing formula. A couple things. One is this new administration is really big on partnerships with nonprofits, with community stakeholders. So that's something that's really been encouraged. Second of all, because the stimulus money is one-time money, it's going to run out at some point, school districts are trying to figure out how they can spend it on things that don't have recurring costs. For example, teachers, you have to keep paying them every year, presumably, unless you lay them off later. But so they're looking to spend money on programs that they could have up and running for a couple years and maybe, unfortunately, drop off when the money runs out. So anyway, so there could be some indirect benefits to this money that's already flowing. And even though the money is not flowing very quickly, in some ways the money is also flowing it is flowing very quickly. And this is a lot of money for states and districts to deal with in just a few months. So there's going to be a lot of scrambling to figure out how to spend the money. So that's something else to keep in mind. So even though just because a lot of this money is already spoken for, and just because it's flowing through existing formula, all is not lost, because there are these categories, which in this chart that you have before you is called other, and that's these very important competitive grants that are just starting to get going through the Department of Education. We could look at the next slide, I think. The Department of Education has $5 billion to give out in competitive grants. These programs are just now getting started, and they're going to start flowing in the fall and pretty much continue through the spring of 2010. So this is where a lot of the focus is, and this is where a lot of the action is. So let's look at what these grants are. Let's first talk about the Race to the Top grants. This is $4 billion that's going to be awarded competitively to states. So states are going to be the initial grant recipients. This Race to the Top has just gotten started. The Department of Ed has just released its criteria for how it's going to award these grants to states. Now, even though the money is going to states, there are a couple opportunities here. One is that states, in order to get this money, and not every state is going to get it, the Department of Ed, I've heard speculation that between 10 and 15 states are going to get a piece of this $4 billion. So those are sizable grants. If 10 states win these grants, that's $400 million per state. So this is a significant amount of money to keep your eye on. So to get the money, states are going to have to come up with very complex education reform proposals that have to deal with a lot of different issues, such as how to improve teacher quality, how to improve data systems, how to work with the really low-performing schools, how to beef up the curriculum, and, all sorts of other reform ideas. So, question to be asking for any of you out there with relationships with your states is, how can we help you in this race to the top? How can we contribute? So I think there are going to be a lot of folks out there wanting to be part of this state effort in Race to the Top. So this is an important grant to watch out for. The timing on this. States are already starting to work on this. The applications are going to be due at the end of the year, with awards starting with the money actually flowing out in March. And then there's going to be a second round of applications for those states who may not be ready yet to come up with their education reform proposal. That's going to take place next year. So you've got some time there, but now's the time to start thinking about how you might be a part of this. Now let's look at a smaller grant program that may be even more relevant, although the details are much sketchier on this one. And these are innovation grants. These two grant programs, the Race to the Top and the innovation grants, were both spelled out very explicitly in the stimulus law. This one provides $650 million, which is, dramatically less than the Race to the Top, but still an important chunk of money. And the grantees for these awards are school districts, a consortia of schools, such as if a bunch of charter schools wanted to get together and apply, and nonprofits. Nonprofits are going to be eligible, as far as we can tell, and now the rules and the criteria are not out yet, but as far as we can tell, nonprofits will be eligible if they partner with a school district or a consortium of schools. So the nonprofit has to have a partner. These grants are for, and again, this may be changing. These are to help districts that are making progress in closing the achievement gap, but they also, I know the department is really interested in other reform areas. They're really interested, again, in community partnerships. How can we partner with people in the community to help improve our schools? They really want to reward districts and schools that have done really good things as a way to kind of encourage others to do the same. Again, these are going to start going out at the end of this year, with the money probably flowing actually in 2010. And we have very few details about this because the Department of Education is still trying to figure out what they want their criteria to be. They're not sure yet how many, awards they want to give out. All we know is right now there's a $650 million pot of money out there that is good to keep your eye on. So these are two of probably the most competitive, open-ended grant programs that are right now flowing through the Department of Education that would be good to keep your eye on. And again, a lot of the rest of the money is already spoken for, unfortunately. So I'd be happy at any point to answer any questions, and I'll turn it back over to you guys, Stephanie and Susan.
Thank you, Michelle. That was terrific. Are there questions for Michelle or for Ann? Again, you need to unmute your phone if you're going to ask a question, otherwise they can't hear you. Well, just to get us started, I'll ask you a question. Michelle, when you talk about partnering, are there, and I noticed on your last slide you also talked about going to scale. Are there examples that Department of Education has already pointed to as great examples in any of their writing about their successes that might give us a clue as to what they're looking for in those community partnerships or in ramping up successful innovations?
One jumps out to me, and I think you're going to hear more about this in the coming weeks as they try to figure out what they want to do with these innovation grants. But for example, one of the big things that Secretary Arne Duncan has talked about is providing extended learning time for students. And it doesn't have to be through the traditional school day. It can be by, turning the school into a community center at night and having tutors come in and work with students. Or in one case, I was traveling with Secretary Duncan, and we went to a high school that was also a YMCA, where community people worked kind of in partnership with the school. And it was open 7 days a week, I think, and from, 12 hours a day or whatever. So that's one example that comes to mind. But I think that they're really open. I don't think they have too many structured ideas of what innovation looks like, but that is one example.
I hope that gets your thoughts going for our participants, because I know lots of you do work very closely with education, the schools and school districts. So I hope that starts the wheels turning for you. Question.
This is Chris Brancotti. I just had a question on the Innovation Fund.
Great. Go ahead, Chris.
I know I've kind of looked at the criteria, and I know that it sounds like for a nonprofit to be eligible, when it's partnered with either a consortia of schools or an LEA, that it requires that they have to meet the No Child Left Behind, kind of achievement standards, or at least show data how their programs have met those standards. And I'm just curious if you've heard anything about how a nonprofit is supposed to meet those requirements, because, for the most part, they just don't have that data.
Yes, you are exactly right. And you raise a question which I think the department is trying to fix. This may be more than you wanted to know, but there's an amendment on the FY10 appropriations bill right now that would deal with that would take away, because right now I think it requires, yes, exactly what you said. School districts have to show, you're supposed to show growth or that you've met AYP under No Child Left Behind, but as you said, nonprofits can't do that. So they know that's a problem, and they're working on fixing it. And I think what they're going to end up with is just some language showing, have demonstrated success. Something much more vague than that. So they're working on that.
And when you say demonstrated success, so you're thinking like longitudinal data or just, some sort of numbers that show the students they've been working with have kind of made progress.
Something, yeah. And in fact, while we're talking, and once I'm going to try to find that language really quick, and I'll come back to you then and tell you. But they may not, I don't know how they're going to define it yet. They may not know yet either. But I know that they're working on trying to make it so that it can apply to nonprofits as well. But I'll look for that right now while we're talking, while we're on to another question.
Thanks.
And while we're waiting for people to generate their questions, I'll ask one of you as well. When you talked about folks waiting to see who in their state might get some of the community strengthening funds, can you just remind folks of the kinds of organizations that were stipulated that were going after that kind of money, so they can kind of think about who that might look like in their community?
Okay, well, they were called lead organizations, and when you think about what they would have to do, in terms of the handing out of financial assistance, tracking evaluations and impacts, also being able by themselves or with others to provide 5 types of capacity building services. It sounds like you'd be dealing with a prominent, Catholic Charities, a United Way. Sometimes there are what do they call them? They're like multi-service centers where there's a lot of human services under one roof, family resource center type places. I think that combination of being able to fulfill the federal grant requirements for tracking funds and effectiveness, combined with the breadth of capacity building activities, would identify, some of these rather large traditional organizations that have multi-million-dollar budgets, but that are working in areas that are very distressed, like Detroit or, portions of urban areas that are really suffering. And it could certainly be, there could be some funds, I suppose, directed in the more rural areas, but, I'm suspecting that it's going to go more to highly visible cities and communities that, we read about in the newspapers that are being so badly impacted, like maybe Phoenix or something like that. And, it would be a United Way or a Lutheran Services or Catholic Charities or something like that.
Thanks. Again, these are guesses, and what I'm trying to do is just stimulate your thinking, folks, about, where you might start to inquire, in your network about who knows about this program and who might apply to. You can, before they get the money, you can make friends.
Well,
once they get the money, everyone will want to be their friend.
But that doesn't come out until September, is that correct?
Are you going to put a brochure in here? Right, that's correct. And the only way I was thinking that you could get any advance indication of who applied, because I didn't see that on the website, was to go with to contact the state or local office of the corporation in your state and to ask them if they did a letter of agreement with an applicant that
just 1 second. For all participants on the phone, if they're not answering a question or asking a question, they can just answer a line by pressing pound 6. There's a little bit of background noise.
We're hearing some conversation in the back, so you may not be aware we're listening to you, but we are. Please, if you can mute your phone, that would be great.
So, I don't know if there's any possibility of getting an early hint as to who was an applicant in your state. But if they were going to get an edge, if they were going to get 2 bonus points on their grant application, they would have needed a letter from their corporation local office about how they were going to use this to volunteers.
That's a good clue. Thank you. So that's your state CNS office.
Can I go back to the question? Was it from Chris about the Innovation Fund?
Yes.
That's right.
I found the language. So they want nonprofits to have a, quote, record of significantly improving student achievement, attainment, or retention. So that's their latest. And again, this is just an amendment in a bill right now, but they're working on it, and that's their language right now.
Can you say that one more time, please?
Sure. A record of significantly improving student achievement, attainment, or retention.
Michelle, would that include programs that were aimed also at parents in the sense of involving parents more in their children's education? I'm familiar with something called the Neighborhood Schoolhouse from where I used to live, And it went beyond providing after-school tutoring opportunities for the students to being a place where a nonprofit ran evening programs that parents and children could come to. So it really reinforced the parental interest in what the child did in school and showing up. And, you know, it could include even arts activities and all kinds of things that nonprofits do. But basically it's building the bond of parents with the school.
That's exactly the kind of thing the department wants to see and talks about when they talk about innovation and partnerships. So, yeah, that sounds like a Department of Education dream.
Oh.
Thank you. I'm wondering, I see a question on the chat, and I'll just see whether anybody would like to speak up on that. And it's a good question. Are there any email announcement lists that include the recovery grants, an RSS feed that includes that? And I'm not aware of any, but that doesn't mean they don't exist.
Well, I think, this is Anne, I think on grants.gov you could set up some kind of feed. And I just had an email that indicated that they're trying to do an even better job of isolating the ARRA grants, recovery grants, from other kinds of grant activity. So there may be the possibility through grants.gov to set up kind of a customized feed to yourself.
Right. This is Michelle. I know on the Department of Education's website there are multiple web pages that deal with the Recovery Act where you can sign up for RSS feeds. So you might also try through the agencies themselves. I, in fact, sign up for their RSS feeds, so they're pretty helpful. And that includes when a new grant, a new pot of money becomes available.
We're still going to be doing questions, but I just wanted to open up the polls now. It's going to be on the right side of your screen. It's a multiple choice and a couple short answers. So I'm opening the poll now, and if everyone could just start filling it out, but feel free to keep on asking questions. 5 is high and 1 is low. Thanks.
This is our evaluation process. This is how we document for the corporation that there were people that got on our e-seminar and got something out of it or made suggestions as to how it could be done. And we would appreciate both kinds of comments. Thank you. So, are there other questions? Experience, Michelle and Ann, is that people get off the phone and tomorrow they have questions. So, if that's the case, I would love to be able to recontact you with some of those questions. Also, I encourage Vistas to get on the Vista campus, use the forum to ask your questions. It's a good way to talk with your peers. It's a way to generate some conversation about what you're doing related to recovery funding and recovery work. So please use it. It's a great resource for you, and we hope you'll take advantage of it. For the rest of you, you can feel free to contact us at Campaign Consultation. We're always happy to answer any questions, and we will get back to our presenters with more information. And Jeff is going to type into the bottom there our address, and obviously that's hers. Thank you, Jeff. So please feel free to copy that down and copy it. Thank you so much, Anne and Michelle, for being part of this today. We really do appreciate your knowledge and your in-depth presentations, and I hope that it's been helpful to folks. We've spent a lot of time trying to track stuff down for you, and we all wish that it were more comprehensive, but that doesn't seem to be the way this money is coming down. I will add that in the process of my research, I discovered 2 other programs that I would have loved to include some background on, and they are only going to apply to some of you, but for the ones that they do apply to, you may want to check out. They look like that there is still going to be Department of Labor money for workforce development coming out over the next year, much like Department of Education. So if you're involved in job readiness and those kinds of functions, whether it's green jobs or other jobs, you may want to take a look at the Department of Labor website as well as grants.gov to take a look at that. There also looks like a lot of HUD money that's come down through community development block grants. If you're involved in community development work, you may want to take a look at that. There's some good examples on their website, on HUD's website, of the way communities are getting involved with that money. So we would have loved to have someone speak on each of those agencies, but weren't able to do that. One comment that I did get from from the Council of Mayors that I was in touch with through this process was the guest of a strategist there that this is not going to be a one-shot deal because many agencies aren't going to be able to, in some states, give out all the money quickly enough, so there will be another round of funding. So you definitely want to keep looking at what your state's doing with the money and whether they've gotten money that they haven't given out yet. That may mean there'll be another opportunity for funding later in the year on a variety of topics. So look at what it is you do, what your core functions are, and what agencies might be involved in supporting that, and keep your eye on it. And I hope that's been helpful to folks. I look forward to, we will be doing another series of e-seminars starting in September. The topics are still being decided, so we will post them to the listserv as well as on the viewfinder, Vista Viewfinder. So keep your eyes open for that, and we hope to see you again in another e-seminar. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.